wait, if this guy is spending that much money to, one, acquire me, and is going to spend even more to keep me on the job, what exactly do they get in return? What are probably the biggest fears around the profiles of candidates that they are looking for, and how that shifts the chances of a candidate when they are going through that application process? This is the Hiring Boardroom. At a time when millions of capable young people are applying for jobs, sending CVs, preparing for interviews, and still getting nowhere, one question keeps coming up. What exactly are companies actually looking for? On this series, we're not going to give you regular job hunting tips. It's about the decisions that happen before you ever see the job on the dashboard or on the posting board. The pressures, the risks, the politics, the incentives inside the rooms where hiring decisions are made, and why most of you who try to apply never get them. If you've ever felt so qualified but overlooked, or stuck despite trying everything you know to be right, this series is going to change how you approach opportunities. It's going to blow your mind, and frankly, it's going to unearth a lot of the beliefs that you have about jobs, applications, hiring, unemployment, and breaking into the employment market. There's a story from the World War II that explains almost everything about how we misread hiring. In World War II, the US military was losing fighter planes in Germany. So they brought in scientists to figure out exactly how to stop it. They laid out photos of all the planes that returned from combat. And on those photos, you could clearly see bullet holes on the wings and the fuselage. The generals looked at the data in front of them, all the photos, and basically said, they are hitting us here, here, and here. Let's reinforce these areas and we should be good. But one of the scientists paused them and said, that would probably be the biggest mistake you'd make in your military careers, because you're only looking at the planes that made it back. The planes hit in the engines, the cockpits, and the most dangerous places never returned. That's why there are no bullet holes in the engines and cockpits of the photos of the ones that returned. The most important information in that context was what they could not see. It was what was missing, and that's called a ghost note. The signal that you don't hear, but changes everything. And hiring works that way. You only see job descriptions, interviews, and feedback, the planes that made it back in the world of hiring. What you don't see when you are pursuing that opportunity and chasing it with every aspiration and dream that you have is the pressure, the fear, the risk that exists inside a company who has decided to put that role out on the market. The kind of tiptoeing and anxiety with which hiring managers look for candidates, even though they definitely need one. That's what this series is about. So in the Hiring Boardroom, we'll pull you back into the room you have never been invited into, and you'd see everything from the hiring manager's perspective. Before we begin, though, I want to welcome Erasmus to the show. And I want him to obviously break silence by attempting to answer probably one of a very difficult question for him, because I'm sure it would, if we give him the time, this question, he will probably never finish answering it. Erasmus, what does this series represent for you within the context that we live in? Because this context is quite messy. Like the number of people I speak to who are looking for new opportunities, the people who come to me and says, my CV is not working, my cover letter is broken, I have an interview and I'm not sure what to do about it, and I keep applying and they keep rejecting for the past 2 to 3 years. Within this context, everybody sees applying for jobs from the applicant's perspective, the desire, the hunt, the perfection tactics. But this boardroom says, you guys have been seeing it wrong. Switch on the room in the lights in the back door room and let everyone see for once what happens in those rooms. How valuable is this within the context we exist in?
You're absolutely right. I think in today's day and age where we're seeing unprecedented levels of global instability. You would expect and you'd know that
Yeah.
definitely is going to affect the economy. And once it does, one of the main aspects that is going to hit is employment. So what we've seen, especially after COVID and even further down the line, what we've seen is that there's massive, massive numbers of people who are either in not in employment, or even when they are in employment, are places called vulnerable levels of employment, where they are unsatisfied with the level at which they
Yeah.
are, or they've had to sort of like compromise to get there. And we're also genuinely seeing genuine economic struggle. And this is not coming from the usual crowd. Usually they would like to say the youth is lazy and all of that, but this is even coming from
Yeah.
highly industrious, highly educated people. We're seeing this on levels that we've never seen before. And as a result of that, one of the main avenues for making money and trying to make a living, which is employment, has become super competitive in the last couple of years, and therefore
Yeah.
it's important that you are able to take advantage of any information that you most likely would be able to get about this process. So you're seeing an explosion even of such content online. You're seeing recruiters come out to try and come and speak and give some of these insights. I think that this insights which we want to share in terms of allowing people to see the decisions behind the hiring manager unlocks an extra layer of being able to understand this process and create yourself to try and meet it, because um it's quite competitive out there. So I think that the more you understand how to build yourself for these kind of opportunities, the better.
I think you use a specific set of words that it unlocks an extra layer. For me, I think it probably unlocks what I would consider the most important layer. Because if you think about it, the reason why we've put in the work to start this and look at this from the room that has been shut for a very long time, with if you visually imagine it, with lights off, cranky old men manipulating everyone else, but nobody sees exactly what is happening in that room, is basically the fact that we entered the room recently. Like we've obviously been speaking to people who've been in the room for a very, very long time. We, as part of episodes on the Shaft Conversations, we've had conversations with very, very top-notch global recruiters who have given us recommendations. But it was up until we entered those rooms, started discussing hiring, started realizing the context within which people hire. And then we realized, wait a minute, that is why that explains a lot. That explains a lot of the gaps people see within the hiring situations from the applicant's perspective, and what happens within the boardrooms and on those corridors of discussion between that little lunch break where the hiring manager and HR professionals are sitting there discussing exactly which candidate should they pick. We now understand the psychology behind it, the mentality and the risks at play for these people making those decisions. So for me, I'm very excited about this series because, for once, I think people who are looking to apply for jobs get to see, with a certain candidness and a level of no filter, exactly what these boardrooms look like and what these conversations happening there are influenced by. And I think one of the biggest questions that come up, and that people forget to ask a lot of the time, but we realized how vital it is what happens for a company to start to hire. Like, companies are set up, they form their initial teams. They look for, okay, maybe a few people start doing their thing. And then they get to a point where they go, wait a minute, maybe we need someone else. There are several conditions for which reason that point, that reflection or that inflection point comes about. I think it's worth asking, what are these sets of conditions? Because if we've come to find out, the diverse conditions radically change the profiling of candidates when applications are put out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important point to consider, because if you think about hiring managers, every hiring manager has something they call a head count, which is the number of people that they are
Yeah.
allowed to hire in order for them to achieve their objectives. If you think about it, in retrospect, these hiring managers are people who necessarily need to put people together or organize the labor and get them to achieve a
Yeah.
certain outcome. So they all have their targets and objectives, which they all necessarily want to be able to achieve. It could be that they are required to bring in like a specific sales target, or sometimes these could be different operational targets. So at every point in time, they would
Yeah.
want to make sure that they have the right number and the right balance of people in order to be able to achieve these kind of objectives. So in instances where individuals have left, they would need to replace. And in those instances, you would realize that the hiring managers are almost looking for a like to like replacement. They usually think of you being able to fill in that gap, especially if they feel like the machine that they have running is good enough. Sometimes they may also use it as an
Yeah.
opportunity to diversify the people that they have on their roster, seeing the opportunity to add different skills depending on the new objectives which they've set for themselves. But in some special instances,
Yeah.
although I'll say this is the minority of instances, but these are also the instances where you want to be hired. In these instances, you find out that the company is either trying to solve a specific problem or is trying to explore a specific
Yeah.
opportunity within the market to create value. So it may be that they are opening a new division.
Yeah.
It may be that the workload in itself has expanded. And in those instances, they want to bring in someone to be able to deal with it. Sometimes it is something very, very specific. It may be a regulatory
Yeah.
update. It could be a government enforcement which has created a specific need, and therefore they'll need to bring people of diverse experiences to come in there. So I think it's very, very important to understand who they are, why they are even seeking to hire in the first place, and then understand how you can slot yourself in.
Interesting. So, I mean, there's a lot of headcount, so many terminologies that we've heard in that answer. But from what I've seen, and basically, if you walk across every boardroom in every business, there's one saying that seems true, that money is the king of the boardroom, and money does the talking. And regardless of whatever happens in the boardroom, ultimately everybody bows at the feet of the finance officer and the guy who is balancing the books, because what he says is the priorities of the company has to be, in some way, shape, or form, the priorities of the company. How influential is money in this context? Because a lot of people, from the hiring or from the applicant's perspective, obviously see that job as a life-changing opportunity, in the sense that they get the job of their dreams or a job that they are envisioning to have, the prospect of the revenue that it brings in, the impact that it creates within their lives and the lives of their family, and the kind of future that that job is able to help them build. But if you think about it from that perspective, hold on, the company is the one losing the money. So why are they enthusiastic about going to hire the person? What role is money playing in that exchange that we don't see when we are sitting behind our laptops, busily typing out our cover letters?
No, you need to understand that every seat within the hiring process is very, very important. It's one that hiring managers compete
Yeah,
to get, especially in the context of larger
yeah,
organizations, which I believe we're all speaking about, because it's very, very. These conversations can become a bit abstract quickly because there are different levels of organizations, different skills at which they
yeah,
do operate, but the kind of context where we speak about, hiring managers do need to compete in order to get it. And even if it is a small business and necessarily the business owner is also the hiring manager, you also know that they are competing where to spend the resources, because hiring is a very, very expensive
yeah,
process. But at the end of the day, you need to also understand that hiring managers and business owners are accountable are accountable to the shareholders or the owners in the case of the business owners.
yeah,
And they would necessarily need to make profits. Even if they own the entire business, they would expect that they make profits from it
yeah,
in order for it to be sustainable and still be an attractive enterprise. And as part of being able to determine the profit, you need to account for all of the different inputs. And it does happen that hiring becomes one of the more expensive parts of the operational expenses which you want. So in order for them to make money, they need to manage those operational expenses, which means they need to manage hiring. So it is very, very hard for hiring managers to always justify why they need that extra person. They sometimes need to go all the way
Yeah.
up. And therefore, when they have the opportunity, they do not want to waste it. And it's not likely that they do get the opportunity all the time. I mean, it will depend on the specific company or the specific division or what, but the
Yeah.
general understanding that I have is that those positions are well fought for because it costs the company money.
Interesting. Um, I would leave a lot of the money questions for now, especially from the perspective of how much it costs to hire a person, because it's
You
the
have some
reason why we
mass.
need to understand it is because then you the reason why you need to understand is because then you question yourself. Wait, if this guy is spending that much money to one acquire me and is going to spend even more to keep me on the job, what exactly do they get in return? And how exactly that thing that they are looking for in return shape their expectation within the hiring process. And I think understanding that would be really, really crucial again in achieving the purpose of this series, which is peel out the white ghosts. What do you call it? The ghost notes that people are not seeing and exactly what is not obvious to them. But there's an episode within this series which obviously talks about the actual cost of hiring and what exactly that does to the boardroom and how that changes the tone of the conversation in the boardroom when candidates are being considered. So I don't want us to do so much of spoiler alerts. So let's hold on a little bit with the money talk. But the other side of the conversation I wanted us to look at is like you just painted, hiring managers, whether or not they are the business owner themselves, a small business which has an HR person who does the hiring, which, mind you, has its own risks, right? Because it means that they don't have a lot of money to spare. Therefore, the tolerance of mistakes is much lower because if you hire a person who is not a good fit, the cost, the cycle of rehiring, and all the opportunity cost and the loss in between is much more deeply bared and what do you call it, deeply painful when it's a smaller organization that maybe some of these big global organizations who have the budget to, sure, maybe weather off a few bad hires. But even in those big global organizations, the risks changes. Like you said, the risk is now having a large number of hiring managers having to compete for their place within that hiring process in order to be the people hiring, to be able to demonstrate that they are good. That's where their promotions come from, and the reliability of their hires determine, do they have good judgment? Can we trust them to now not just hire what do you call it, an associate, but hire an executive? How exactly do these things play? So given this kind of stakes in different levels of organizations, what exactly is the emotional temperature within which hiring managers are usually navigating these hiring processes? Because being able to understand it is significant in terms of how you approach it. For example, if I know that I'm coming to have a conversation with you and you are in a very bad mood and you are pissed, I'm very sure my approach to that conversation will be wildly different versus if I'm coming and you were having a bowl of ice cream and you met me with a joke at the door. That conversation will be wildly different. So being able to understand the broader scope of emotional status or mental status within which hiring managers do their job will probably be very, very significant. So I think you being able to help us get there will be one thing that the viewers would really enjoy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You realize from my earlier submission that there may be two mindsets that they may be taking. First off, they may have a clear
Yeah.
idea what they want you to come in to do or who they are looking for. So it may be that you may be replacing
Yeah.
a specific candidate in a or you may be replacing someone specific in the process, and they're looking for someone who is coming there to execute the very same thing. It may be that they may want to improve
Yeah.
slightly on the person who is there, so they may be asking for additional skills because the business needs have changed. But you also realize that there is a second mindset where it could be that because the position has not previously existed, they could be quite open as to who they get in there.
Yeah.
In those instances, you would realize that they will try to they'll have a fair idea. Of course, they'll have a fair idea who necessarily they want in there, but they will be quite open as to who necessarily can fill in that gap and be able to take on those responsibilities, especially when it's opening up a new
Yeah.
division, it's opening up a new branch, or we're creating a new role in order to facilitate something. And in some instances, it may be that the candidates themselves need to define the role, because sometimes some of these positions that they are hiring for may be outside of the expertise of those hiring managers. So think about someone who thinks,
Yeah.
I need to improve sales, and therefore I need a sales officer. In this case, they may
Yeah.
know one, two about sales, but a sales officer may bring more expertise. So you are going there as the expertise to convince this guy that you need to
Yeah.
take me because I know how to do this work, and show them within the hiring process
Yeah.
that how we can help you achieve this outcome. It's sort of like a mini prototype sort of thing within that process that I can help you achieve this
Yeah.
outcome. So I think those are the two mindsets. But what underpins both of them is they are taking a risk, right? They are taking a risk that when you come in there, you will come
Yeah.
in and you'll be able to do the job. First of all, because like I said, hiring in itself is very expensive. But secondly, when a hiring goes wrong, being able to correct it is even way more expensive.
Yeah. There are two things I want to sort of add, and there's one that brought a funny story to mind. Just today on my way back home from on the bus ride, I saw a reel on Instagram where you see these dating shows, or people going on a date, and then there's a camera on them. I mean, my reservations about those ones, let me put that one aside for now. But the two people were on a date, and it's obviously caught on camera. And the guy requested that the girl takes off her makeup, takes off her lashes, wipes her makeup off because he needs to see her without makeup. The girl asked, "Is he serious?" He said yes. The girl obviously obliged, takes the eyelashes off, cleans up the makeup, and then eventually goes like, "Nah, even though you looked at my face and still said you like me, I don't like you anymore." And she changed her answer from yes to no. And the reason why he did that was because, according to him, someone had hurt him, right? Someone had hurt him before. So say you go and watch, and then you go and look at his past. He took someone home, and after the morning wash, he realized it cannot be. It cannot be. And you see, the thing I'm driving to is that there is a study on ResearchGate that says almost 60% of hiring is basically hiring from quitting or from exits. So hiring because someone has left and you're coming to replace the person. And very rare occasions do people leave because, I mean, maybe you can take it 50-50, but a lot of the time, the person who left or who was fired, specifically if the person was let go, left a scar that the hiring manager is trying to avoid. So, like the guy who came and said, "Unless you wipe your makeup, I can't trust you." That hiring manager is sitting there in that hiring call or throughout the CV reviews and all that, looking for not what they want, but what they don't want. They basically have a clear idea of who they don't want. So they're looking for the person who is willing to wipe the makeup off their face and then go like, "Yeah, I'm fine doing that just so you can see exactly who I am." Which means that you sort of have to approach at least 6 out of 10 applications that you do with that mindset that hiring managers are there to not sort of check off correct things, but more like cross out bad things to some degree. And so they are doing elimination tactics, and understanding that could help how you approach it. And if you think about it, further studies, a lot of studies actually show that hiring managers and their decision-making time has significantly slowed. It slowed up to over a month, which is why obviously a lot of people say, I've applied for a job and almost a month and I don't hear back. And randomly they send me an email saying that they've rejected me. But the delay in hiring decisions has risen by over 80%. And the reason is hiring managers are very, very careful about who they are trying to pick now. So I think being able to understand the reasons why they are tiptoeing around an area that previously they used to confidently walk into, could bring a lot of clarity around what happens when you're applying for those jobs and what the hiring manager is going to be looking at and what exactly you need to present for those hiring managers in order to make the decisions easy for them.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's funny because at the base of it, we are all human beings, right? When you meet someone, you perhaps
Yeah.
don't know even if you don't know what you want, you know what you don't want, right? And which is all based on your past experiences.
Yeah.
And it's not like candidates can no, it's not like you can solve that. But because someone also shared a story on Facebook and said they were going for a PhD defense and they put their degrees, they put their first degree and they put first class on it.
Yes.
And they said, the lecturer said, so you think because you are first class? And that's it.
Yeah.
The guy didn't get in and they gave him a horrid time over there. And
Yeah.
how would he have known that these people are triggered by first class? And how ridiculous it is also that you get
Yeah.
triggered by first class. But this is the reality of the world that we live in, also that we have people who
Yeah.
think like that. So maybe that also enters into your psychology and you used to operate.
Yeah. Charlie, as for me, I've named the guy the makeup guy because and the philosophy is the makeup philosophy. At this point, you your life is based on a lot more on how people respond to the things that you do, as opposed to treating you as an independent institution that just interacts with people
Yeah.
and expect a straightforward response.
Yeah.
But yeah, just before we proceed, if you're watching this and you've been applying for roles and it feels unpredictable, like the situations Erasmus just described, like you can't tell what will land and what will quietly disappear, that's usually not a competence problem, right? It's a visibility problem. We've seen that, we've analyzed that, we've explored it with so many different people we've helped privately. You are responding to what's written on those job applications, but not necessarily what caused the role to exist in the first place. And most people never get taught how to see the difference and how to fix it. We spent a long time taking this exact hiring logic, the ghost notes, the triggers, the decision pressures, and turning it into something practical that you can actually use to apply for your jobs. The ebook linked below, also displayed on the screen, breaks this down and shows how this thinking actually translates into CVs, cover letters, interview preps, and interview approaches without the room for the random guessworks that you currently work with. So if this episode gives you the lens, think about the ebook as where that lens becomes usable, where you're able to translate it into application terms and use it for every stage of your application. There's a reason why it's titled How to Land Your Dream Job, and you should actually click that link below. Erasmus, there is a second layer to this conversation that I want us to explore, which is we've looked at these different types of triggers, right? That essentially could cause a role to be up on the market. For instance, one hire is a growth hire. So scale is what is already working. Essentially, if you're a growth hire, for instance, your focus is to scale what is already working. That's what they're expecting from you, right? But if a hire is to fix something or is to repair something, it's not necessarily to scale what is already working. It's to fix something that is quietly failing. And even though it might be the same role title, those different contexts significantly shift the kind of personality that you are looking for. In the situation where you are looking for somebody who scales, you might probably want a very adventurous person, has tons of ideas, just thinking and exploring them and bouncing them out left, right, center. But if you have the person who is being hired to come and steady the ship, you probably are looking for somebody who is kind of conservative, who is a stickler for the processes and the functionality and the systems and setting them in place and being a little bit rigid, but ensuring that they fix the problems at the heart of it. The question then is, if we are trying to make this very, very practical for people, if a company is doing a replacement hire, what do you think they fear the most, right? And depending on the types of hires that they're doing, what are probably the biggest fears around the profiles of candidates that they are looking for, and how that shifts the chances of a candidate when they are going through that application process?
Yeah, no, but that's a very, very good question. I think the context that you set to it also helps to approach the question, because um
Yeah,
a lot of times every candidate has their weakness and they have their strength. So you would also need to balance it, right? Most candidates who, like you said, have
yeah,
a lot of ideas may sometimes be lacking a bit of the structure. So in some instances, you may be looking at, okay, how well is this person compensating for their weaknesses? So you
yeah,
obviously be aware of the risk. Some of the fears which they have is that the person comes in, they do not adapt to the job quickly, they do not take to the job, they are not able to settle quickly, especially if they are looking for them to settle in quickly to do
yeah,
the job, and they are not meeting the very levels of expectations, because then the person becomes a dead rubber. Then you need to spend extra effort to get their productivity up. So most times, and
yeah,
it's why I'm hiring a lot of times you hear that people are saying hiring managers focus a lot on their soft skills and the personal competencies, because it is very easy to teach the
yeah,
technical skills, but it is very hard to teach kind of like the soft skills and how you settle within a team and you get to achieve
yeah,
your goals. Obviously, there are some places where, or some jobs where the technical skill demands are very, very high. But in all instances, I would assume that before you get to the job, you perhaps have a baseline level of technical skills. But those soft skills are very, very important in order for you to be able to connect with the team, settle in, and be able to merge with them. It's very hard to predict how someone will come in and would do well. So you need to find that level of adaptability. You want to find all the best characteristics as much as possible. But at the end, it will still be about the kind of culture that you've created within the team, and how you're able to help the individual also settle in, and the kind of resources that you're able to support them with in order for them to do their job.
yeah. The second question I want to ask, which is probably a tougher question that a lot of people who are trying to look for jobs listening to this episode will be wondering. Yeah, everything you guys have been saying is really, really good. I see the value in all of this, but I still don't know why they are hiring. So, like, how do I find out, right? How how do I know why exactly these guys are hiring, and what do I do with that information when I find it?
No, so there are, I mean, of course, when we cover this series, we'll go into all of those details, but there's so many ways to find information.
Yeah,
First of all, online, you can read about the
yeah,
company, read the job description. People don't read the job description. I have my different theories about job descriptions, but it's usually a very good indicator of,
we will discuss that in this
yes,
episode in a bit.
yes, of what they're looking for. But thirdly, do interviews. Like, okay, not interviews like the actual interview, but speak to people. Speak to people who
Yeah,
belong to such a profession. Like before I entered into corporate, I had a long chat with my uncle, because none of my immediate family members had worked in corporate before and had no understanding
yeah,
of what the demands, the requirements was. So my uncle was the one that I knew worked in corporate. So I had a very, very long chat with him. And even though he was not directly in the field, he was able to give me a very good perspective of what demands are, what promotion cycles look like, how you need to treat your boss, those kind of
yeah,
things. So speak to people, talk to people to try and get as good of a picture as much as possible, because sometimes that general knowledge may
yeah.
cross apply to the industry. But if you can get members of the team, even the hiring manager themselves, to message them to speak to them before applying, it's all very, very good.
Yeah. I mean, let me give you guys a little bit of a cheat code. Since you've listened to this far, it's a very good way to say thank you for listening to this point in the episode, and we hope you're enjoying it. But one of the easy ways you could do this is now there's AI. Actually, just ask it to search for all the people who have held that role or similar roles in that exact company before. A lot of people publish their work histories on LinkedIn, write
Mm.
it on their portfolios, put it somewhere, and it's easy to scrape it. using AI search functions. If not, you can go to LinkedIn yourself, search for people who work in that company, and see the people who have previously held that role. If you're lucky, you might even find it on the company's website as well. But obviously, if you don't want to do all this labor-intensive work, even though technically you should be doing it, just cheat with AI. For once, cheating is allowed. Cheat with AI
That's
and
actually
search for it and
that,
find it. And I think, yeah, that helps you see, one, the frequencies with which people have left the role. Who was the last person who held it? How long did he hold it for? What is the background of that person? And sometimes the backgrounds of the person who has left the role quickly tells you something. Like if this person has a similar background to yours, or you would find that person very competent for the role, and that person is no more there, it clicks something. Maybe that's the person you might want to check in with and say, hey, yeah, I'm trying to apply for this role, but I just wanted to understand what were your experiences in that role. I did one when I was moving to Hong Kong to work. I went to someone who works with the organization and said, I'm planning on taking a job here. You've been working with them for a while. How do you see working with them as? And I think maybe that is something you could explore, even if you are not able to talk to anyone at all. That creates an expectation or an understanding that this is a high churn role, or a role. When I say high churn, I basically mean people leaving it early. I sometimes just don't want to throw, or don't feel comfortable throwing technical corporate terms out there without explaining them. But essentially, a
O'Shea.
high churn role means people leave the role early or quickly, right? If this is a high churn role, it tells you a lot that the hiring manager might be frustrated by losing people in that role over and over again. And therefore, they would be really, really happy to find someone who they can rely on for stability. And so, in that instance, you quickly think about how that influences your approach and how you present yourself, right? Some keywords you use in your interviews and all that. So, I mean, that's a free bonus for those who have listened to this point. And I hope you enjoyed it. I have, I think, one more question on this before we move to job descriptions, which is essentially the idea that if you think about the way in which um, if you think about the way in which these triggers work, some of them are very, very straightforward. Like you said, someone left, I'm replacing them. It's quite easy for those ones in the job descriptions, right? Because they just put out what they are looking for in the person who left. Um, if in some other instances where it's a lot more creative, but they have never experienced the clear idea of what that role requires, right? So it's like they create a new department and they are looking for it. I see a lot of job posts in January this month, last month, where they go like, my team is trying to recruit this new person, and their responsibility would be to create X, Y, Z. And even though we've never had somebody like that in our team before, we are really, really expecting, and we are excited to look forward to that person. They have a dream in their head. And I feel like those hirings are probably even more difficult to meet in terms of expectation, because they've not been disappointed yet. For for the ones where people have held several times, they sort of have a realization of the realistic ranges within which those applications and the competencies should fall. In an entirely new role, they are wild. They are allowed to dream for as big and as far as they could go. If it is very obvious in such an application that this is an application underpinned by expectations of dreams instead of realities, what do you think applicants should do and change about the way in which they approach that role?
Yeah, sell them a dream, sell them a vision. I no, I personally think those are the easiest, right? Because it's about
Yeah,
you being able to sell a vision of the role that they would be happy with. And they're like, it's everyone has their own track.
yeah,
With that one, they want to see you, they want to see someone who is unique. Like one of the, we do sports, so
yeah,
I watch sports a lot. One of the things that I've seen
yeah,
is that there are coaches who get hired based on their vision that they can sell. And if you are an
yeah,
employee or you're a manager, and you need to be constantly selling your vision, constantly. There's something I found
Yeah.
interesting. You know, I was watching like a setup of entrepreneurs who were presenting
Yeah.
at a business conference, and they were presenting technologies for the future. So you had like people who were presenting
Yeah.
robots, people who were speaking about biology and the plants and what it will come and do. And funny enough, everyone who came, every CEO who came, looked like the business they were selling. They the tech
Yeah.
guy who was doing the robots had like tied his hair, had, you know, like was in his sleeve. He wasn't looking official, he was in his sleeves,
Yeah.
showing, you know, that sort of thing. The plants guy was in a boring shirt, like in glasses, and
Yeah.
saying he's selling healthy food. He looks like someone who just eats
Yeah.
healthy. So I realized that as a CEO, manager, whoever, employee, you are constantly selling yourself. You are constantly selling the vision. How you
Yeah.
look is how you'll be perceived, and that's how your work will be perceived. And in the
Yeah.
football example, which I was using for you, like recently when Chelsea appointed the head coach, you could see that one of the reasons they like him is because he's very confident and he's young, and he also
Yeah.
is just 40 years old. So even though he's young, he's also old enough and almost just came out of that uh,
Yeah.
30s and whatever, those kind of short faces. So
Yeah.
he has a short memory in terms of remembering what he
He's
felt.
he's he's old enough to be Ghana's president.
Exactly, just right enough. And you realize that he sells the vision of
Yeah.
I'm young, but I'm ambitious and I'm capable. And for me,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
what the hierarchy bought into. So it's it's quite easier, in my opinion, in those instances. Sell them your vision, sell them your hope, and bring everything that is in you, whilst also understanding what they are looking for.
Interesting. I mean, this small segment that we've discussed, I find probably one of the most important segments in the conversation, because the reason why we found that a lot of career advices that people get have not been working is because they treat every single role as the same, beyond the surface obvious differences, like, or maybe if you're applying for a finance role, or if you're applying for maybe an operations role, or if you're applying for a senior role, a junior role, or an associate role. But within those roles themselves, there are down to earth specific differences based on the triggers of those roles. And that's why hiring is ultimately a risk decision made under specific pressures with specific money, reputation, and political capital on the line. And those conditions change everything. Again, if you've been listening to this point, I've spoken about the ebook once. That ebook also addresses this. It exists because once you truly understand how hiring decisions are justified in the boardroom, you stop giving your CVs to AI and giving them some random prompt to simply polish it blindly. And you start aligning it with the specific incentives that these hiring managers are looking for. You are empowered enough to read in between the lines, because now, after listening to this mini segment, you can tell when you read a certain job description or a post made by the hiring manager or the CEO of that company announcing the hiring, you can tell where exactly that hiring is coming from and how that hiring changes things. But what the ebook adds is that we in the ebook, you don't just get the explanation of the philosophy. There are practical examples of how to apply this thinking to how your CV is interpreted, therefore how your CV should be drafted, what your cover letter is actually supposed to signal, how interviews are assessed, and what interviewers are really listening for when they sit across that room or on Zoom and are nodding to everything you are saying, but in their heads, canceling half of the things that you are saying. It's not just the random motivational stuff around hiring. It's not generic. It's by far the highest quality of consultation that you would get on how to get your dream job and any job that you want. Finally, the gray area and the deep zone of job descriptions. Erasmus tends to like job descriptions because he says people should read them. I'm eager to hear his perspective on this, because I am probably one of the biggest skeptics around job descriptions. The way in which people come up with them, the way in which people write them, and the fact that even throughout the hiring process, things might have changed within the organization that might have evolved the role even before you are employed to come and fit in. There are a lot of conditions that move around when that post is made. But that is not to say that, what do you call it, job descriptions are absolutely useless. It's written often by people with different incentives. The HR wants compliance and broad coverage, so they want to be able to appeal to all the different alignments that they need. Hiring managers want speed, they want specificity. Senior leaders want to reduce the downside and the churn that happens. And sometimes they are recycling an old posting because they just don't have time, right? So the job description describes the plane that came back. Remember the story we told at the start. It describes the visible role. It rarely reviews the ghost notes and what the company cannot afford to happen next or what they are not telling you in there. So my first question to Erasmus on this is, why do you think so often people find that job descriptions are very, very disconnected from what the interview ends up being focused on?
Yeah. And I thought this was the last question. But usually when 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 you're looking at these job descriptions, I think, like I said, I have a lot of different
Yeah.
theories around it. I mean, there are some people who
Yeah.
maybe just copy something off the internet or have a fair idea what maybe a marketing assistant does or something of that sort, and therefore they process it and they put it there. But you can tell a lot from a job description if it is intentionally written. So if it is more intentionally written, it gives you a
Yeah.
sense that they are quite specific in what they are looking for. There are some job descriptions that it's a lot. They maybe describe like step-by-step process
Yeah.
what you'll be doing. So you mostly understand that this will be a process-based job. They are looking for someone who may be organized, may want to multitask. There's some of them you're like, how is one person able to do all of this? Some of them too that has some very vague expectations because they want to test who can see behind the curtain and who can see behind the veil. So all of these things enter into how the job description is written. And I think understanding that is perhaps crucial to how you'd be able to approach that job, how you'd be able to tailor your CV and then speak to them within the interview also.
Yeah. Interesting. I know you thought that the question I asked was the last question, but I have one more for you. And yeah, I understand and I sort of get what you're saying. I think for so long people have taken job descriptions as the gospel truth because also that is their way of, really, that's the only source of information they have about the job from the company. They don't get to the corridors of these boardrooms. They haven't watched an episode of the Hiring Boardroom. They have not seen behind the scenes and in those dark, scared rooms of CEOs and HR people negotiating and discussing how much budget they're releasing. They don't get to understand exactly what happened. So the source of information that they get to have a slight peek behind the curtain is the job description, and they just take it like a Bible and follow it. But I think for me, these days, what I've tried doing actually is, when you see a job, especially ones that are posted by people, the people themselves make some notes or commentary before the job they forwarded or shared or whatever. That tells me a lot more about it than the lengthy description that they are putting there. So if the hiring manager posted on his LinkedIn or forwarded the job post and typed something in the post, that part is a little bit curious about what exactly are the incentives, because they try to be a little bit more personal and brief in that segment than when you go into the hiring description themselves. Again, if you've listened to 49 minutes of the first episode, this bonus is for you. But one final question is essentially, what exactly are some of the things that are the ghost notes within a hiring a job description? You see the job description, you are seeing it, But if you see it, there are certain things that are not there, but we don't know what is not there too. So when you sit in the boardrooms that we are in now, in this context, having this conversation, what are the things that we consider heavily, but we never put in the hiring description or the job description? And therefore, when you're an applicant, probably they are the things that, even though are missing, you should be looking for.
Yeah, so I think for me, you need to understand first of all the constraints, what is available,
Yeah.
what is presumably available for you to do the things that they want you to do. What necessarily are the conditions which they are given to you and under which they want you to do the job or to succeed. You also need
Yeah.
to look out for reasons why the role exists. Sometimes they may drop these hints. They may say that they are looking for an exciting candidate to cover X and X, Y, this area, and all of that stuff. I think that also gives you some pre-context to the history in here. I think also you need to look at what they will consider to be success metrics. You need to consider
Yeah.
how necessarily they'll be measuring the candidates, how they'll be assessing what essentially you do or how well you've done within the job. And I think you need to
Yeah.
consistently be looking out for those things and try to draw them out as much as possible. It's important that you look out for them. I think sometimes the job description will also tell you the quality of the job. And that saves you a lot
Yeah.
and gives you a lot about the company even before you approach them.
Interesting. If you've listened to this episode, the full episode, obviously, first thing is thank you so much for staying with us. But if you've also listened to it and you happen to be having an interview around the corner, what I would say is this episode probably is the best thing you would have had the opportunity to listen to before your interview, because what it does is it radically changes all the questions you would have asked during that brief moment where they ask you, do you have any questions for us? Because I know if you are listening, you would have said a polite, oh no, I have no questions for you. You know the questions to ask now to get insight into exactly what triggered this hiring. What was the previous person? How did this role become vacant? What are you looking for in terms of success 1 year down the line? And this is the kind of discussions that should change the way in which you approach that interview. But ultimately, if this way of seeing hiring resonates with you, if it explains why your effort hasn't been translating into employment offers, then, like I've been saying all through this episode, that ebook in the description and on your screen was made for no other person than for you. Here's a catch, actually. The first 100 people can get it at a 60% discount, which we've shown. If you get it early, you get to benefit. If not, then those who got it early can be living their dream jobs while you figure things out using the boring advices on the internet. And don't forget to subscribe, because truthfully, episode 2 is where this gets uncomfortably real. We are going into what actually happens in that hiring boardroom. Who is in that room? What they are protecting? What are their interests there? What are they afraid of? Why the hiring decision is often a political act dressed up as a merit decision. And if you've ever felt like the process is rigged or incoherent, episode 2 will explain it in a way that changes how you interpret every interview you walk into and that gap you've been seeing in your experiences. That episode is obviously one of my absolute favorites in this series as we prepared for it, and it's going to hit you like no other episode has. So subscribe. We'll see you in the boardroom on the next episode of the series, and we hope you enjoyed this one. Share your thoughts and leave your comments in the comment section. See you.
See you.